Welcome to the Emblazers show, where B2B leaders are igniting revenue. I'm Abby Kerr, your season 2 host, and I am with the Emblaze Revenue Community by Corporate Visions. Today, I'm bringing you an episode where Tim recently had a conversation with a really insightful guest, and I'm going to share that with you with a little bit of commentary in between. Today's guest is Dr. Howard Dover. He is a renowned expert in sales innovation, coaching individuals, teams, and companies to overcome the sales innovation paradox. A true polymath, he seamlessly bridges the worlds of sales, marketing, and academia, excelling as a sales professional, coach, database and systems analyst, and professor. With a wealth of experience in sales strategy, performance, recruiting, and digital marketing, Dr. Dover has built meaningful networks across industries, helping businesses unlock their potential. He is passionate about fostering the next generation of sales talent and empowering organizations to thrive in an ever-evolving marketplace. Let's go straight to Dr. Howard Dover's conversation with Tim Riesterer.
I was going to say, it's not just Dr. Howard Dover. It's like doctor. So many things going on there that you've got your hands in, and that's what I've always admired. So I'm happy to have you on the show. Excited we got here today, Howard, and looking forward to it.
Thanks. Glad to be here, Tim.
So with that in mind, I'm Sales Innovation Paradox. It's a book you wrote, and we try not to be the book shillers in this podcast, but hey, you did write a book, and it seems prescient in a way. It was a little ahead of its time in some ways in my mind, because it was taking a look at the evolution of the buyer, the modern buying journey, the evolution of all the technology, and where does the salesperson fit in all this? Maybe just for our listeners, just for a little context, maybe share some of the big takeaways from there that we'll then dig into a little bit deeper as we go here.
So I think the way to start about this, Tim, is what was the motivation for the book to begin with, right? And what I was looking at is I'm a sales technologist, so I like tech. So what I did before I got my PhD is I designed technology systems. So I was looking at the technological advances. And when I did tech for the government, we would take a process that would take 3 weeks and get it down to being done in 45 minutes. And so to me, I was looking at this and saying, well, if we're throwing all this tech into sales, we should be seeing a reduction in headcount, right? We should be seeing efficiency in productivity gains. And yet I kept on seeing that we increase the number of salespeople. So just to kind of give you the gist of it, when we increase the capacity of an individual seller, and I'm looking more at the SDR top of funnel that drove this book, when we increased the capacity of one SDR to do the work of maybe 6 to 10 to even 100 SDRs during that time frame of the last 10 to 15 years, but yet at the same time, we increased the number of SDRs by 13x. And so my economics brain said, I don't understand this. That's a paradox. How are we getting better and yet we're hiring more? We should be doing the exact opposite. And so then I went out and looked at quota attainment problems and challenges where we're dropping off in efficacy, and the buyer is turning around and saying, gee, all of this is just not working for me. And I did a lot of keynotes about it. And finally, enough of my friends said, would you please put that in a book? So that's the reason. And it's still more valid today than ever because AI is like 2.0.
Yeah, and we got to dive into AI. But the word productivity is the one that was bandied about all this time. Like, are we going to get 20 to 30% back? And you're saying you could get like 10x back, but then we got to do something about it versus just hire more people. And now AI just kind of adds the steroids to that. It feels like. So you brought it up. Let's go there. So are you seeing now any let's say reduction in the resources needed because productivity and then AI enhanced productivity and technologies are finally clicking in? Or are we still sort of in this pattern of, yeah, let's add bodies to this problem and pile technology, and we're still stuck in this paradox?
Okay, so I'm gonna pivot for you. Probably not where you're expecting this to go, but it really was the theme last year at Emblaze, right? And what really happened is we had that massive interest rate rise, which then took all the fuel out of the field, which included all the money to hire those SDRs and the go-to-market money that was flowing so freely prior to 2022. So it wasn't that we got more efficient. It wasn't that we got more productive. It's that we no longer were willing to spend the money and not be efficient and productive. But I think the bigger question there is this constant tussle between efficiency and effectiveness. And I remember the first time Tamara Shank told me that, and that was back when she was with CSO Insights, and she threw that at me, and it really took me a long time to understand the differences, because efficiency is I can do more with the same people, but it's volume, right? It's a volume metric. Effectiveness is I achieve more with the same amount of effort. And so what I often see when we see technology, including AI right now, is the efficiency game is always the first play. And you and I were at Gartner last week, and I immediately saw the one flaw. I thought the material was great in the keynote, and I said, "Oh my gosh, people are just going to automate the existing inefficient process to make it more efficient, but the existing ineffective system is going to get robotized." And this was the same. This is why I say it's 2.0 period. If you simply take what you've always done that the buyer doesn't like, but gee, we can do it better, faster, cleaner, and less expensive with bots now. Let's go. And yet what we probably need to be doing is reimagining the very way in which we do that work, given that we have intelligence now.
Well, yeah, because we've left the buyer and the buyer experience out of this equation. And a old friend, Mike Bosworth, who you probably know, solution selling Mike Bosworth, used to say this, like, if what you are doing sucks and you just now automate it, all you did was speed up the sucking. And I think that's what I heard you say is like, you can be efficient, but if you're not good at it, you're just more efficient at badness, to stop using the suck word. And so, and
you can use it. It's
okay. All right. Not at home. I can't, but all right. Well, there you go. So I'll have to tell my family that this is now on limits. So so it starts with the buyer, right? At some point, and the buyer's evolving, because we're not the only ones in sales using AI. They're using AI. I'm calling them the pre-convinced buyer. When you finally show up, what's changing there on the buyer side that renders old approaches ineffective? And how do we fix that so that when we automate it, we're automating good stuff?
Well, I think we have to look at how we treated the buyer for the last decade and a half. So when you think about, I increased 10x to 100x my capacity, and then I increased the number of people to do the work by 13x. When you put that all together, the buyer is now being, I'm going to say assaulted. Is that okay? It's assaulted.
Yeah, it's spammed, but it's much more emotional, visceral word that makes the point. So I guess I have to approve that one for you.
130x to 1300x touches. And we're not even talking about cadence concepts with some of these technologies. And what we assume is that the buyer just stayed there and said, "Oh, I can't do anything." Well, what the buyer created a lot of behavioral shift. And that's what I talk about a lot in the book, is that once you understand that the buyer is shifting, and the buyer is actually triple shifting, by the way, but we don't want to have time to go deep into that, but there's a triple shift that's going on with the buyer. And the buyer doesn't stay in the same place. I do an exercise in class for this, for my digital prospecting class. And the first time around, I have my poor TA sit in the middle of the classroom, and I blindfold 4 groups, and they try to go in and get that student in the middle. And And so they go, okay, now I understand how to do it. Now, the second time I go up to the TA and I say, you can move, you can avoid capture. And the TA usually gets up, and they often get up on the tables and run around. And all of the people who are trying to get her are like, hey, this isn't fair. And I'm like, and when we end this, I said, why do you assume the buyer is just going to sit there after you've assaulted them the first time? Because if you watch the way they went after her or him, they lunge, right? I mean, because they're blindfolded, right? They lunge at the TA, and it is a bit of it's like an assault that happens. And so when I interviewed the TA, I said, how did that feel? And they went, I didn't want to be touched. I was worried people were going to hurt me. So I said, well, then why did you want to move? Because I didn't want to be hurt the second time. And so I try to teach that, to say the buyers are the same way. If we approach the buyer, and the challenge that we have, Tim, has nothing to do with what we do. It has everything to do with the market is doing this to our buyer. So if you're a great salesperson and you don't do this kind of stuff, so what? The other people have already behaviorally modified the buyer, so the buyer is already adjusted. So when you begin to understand that as the baseline space, then you say, wow, I really have to differentiate myself. I can't do what everybody else has been doing.
Yeah, you're not innocent until proven guilty. If you're a seller, you're guilty until proven innocent.
You sound like a salesperson. I have defensive mechanisms.
All right. So the magic word, I think there, Howard, was differentiation. A seller, we always think of it in terms of the products. Hey, our product needs to be differentiated, but you just associated that with the seller themselves, because the buyer is assuming that they're all going to act alike and they're not going to like it. So where do you go? You train sellers, you train the next generation of sellers, and differentiation's a piece of it. What does that look like? And how will it change the interaction with buyers?
So what's amazing, I'd like to tell you a few statistics. So in my classes, I see exponential differential. So I get teams that I teach them everything I'm about to tell you. And inevitably, human nature is I'm going to cut and paste, and I'm going to scale, because that's the way it's easy to scale. It's easy to use modern technology to just get a spam cannon, and unfortunately, spam cannons work. That's why we do them. But what's interesting is probably about midterm, I go out and say, all right, let's talk about achievement of goal, right? We're still 6 weeks away from the end. And, they're like, oh, we have 5 interviews. Oh, we have 3 interviews. And somebody says we have 9. And when somebody says 9, I put 3X, right? And then I keep going. And somebody says 6, and I go, 2X. And then I just go all the way down. I said, if I were you, I'd be going to having lunch or coffee or doing something with the people who are 2Xing and 3Xing the rest of you. And the issue is that I teach in those classes the concepts that we live in a world that allows us to have precision and relevance. We have the ability in sales today, for the most part, to use precision, AI, and other technology to identify the exact targets, the exact personalities, the exact people with intent, right? We have a lot of tools to develop precision. But the dilemma that we came into is this issue of when you arrive with precision, you better be relevant. And that means that you have to have competencies. You have to be able to carry the moment. And that is a lot harder than it seems, because as we deployed all these technologies, it was actually before COVID, we started doing this, and a little bit after COVID, and we were seeing students achieve their objectives very, very quickly at the top of funnel. But the bottom of the funnel was decaying. So precision allowed us to get to the people we wanted to talk to. But our students lacked the relevance when they got to the moment. And by the way, they used classic methodologies that everybody teaches, and they just couldn't carry the moment. And this is classically defined by one experience that really kind of set me off on changing the curriculum on this, is that there was a young man who used all the technology. he was an average student. And sometimes when I talked to him, I was confused when I talked to him. I say that to help you understand the story. So he comes up to me in class and he's very, very excited. And he said, "Hey, do you know about Travelers Commercial?" And I said, "Well," because remember, I don't always understand this guy. And I said, "Well, I know what Travelers is. It's the insurance company, right?" He said, "Yeah, that's it." And I said, "And then commercial is the commercial division, like the B2B division of the insurance." He said, "Yeah, that's it." I said, "Okay, great. Now we're on the same page." He said, "Did you know the national director of sales lives in Dallas?" And I said, "No, I didn't know that." And he said, "Do you know I have an appointment with him on Tuesday at 5:00? And I said, "Wow, how did you do that?" And he said, "I used every tool that you showed me how to do." And he was precise, and his preliminary conversation in the asynchronous AI assisted, he was even relevant. Then he had the meeting and the guy hung up on him. What happened, Tim?
Couldn't carry the moment.
He couldn't carry the moment.
What if your next big revenue move didn't come from a blog post or a cold LinkedIn scroll, but from a real conversation with leaders who've been there?
As the world of sales is constantly evolving and constantly changing, I think it's even more critical to get together with people to understand how are they helping to solve some of the problems that our buyers have today.
Meet Emblaze, a community of sharp B2B minds, CROs, CSOs, rising stars, sharing what's actually working in sales, enablement, and customer growth.
We always find a lot of value in the partnerships that we're able to form with some of the other great organizations that are part of the team here. And personally, I love the opportunity to connect with my peer group outside at other organizations and learn from them and try to figure out if there's things that they're doing that we can pull into our organization and benefit from.
Join a monthly forum, dig into science-backed strategy, and get insight you won't find in your feed. Start your Emblaze journey today at emblazegrowth.com.
Oh my gosh, there's so much going on there. Like so many good words. You have so many good words. I'm going to title your new book now, The Sales Relevance Paradox. We have plenty of precision. We're showing up and we're getting access. And then we're decaying, as you said, as we go through the conversation because we can't carry the moment. AI can get you to more opportunities and do it with a level of precision, but then your lips have to move. That's what I always like to say. Like then all of a sudden your lips have to move, and then everybody's like, "Wait, how did you get this meeting?" And so the competency. The 3 C's I think of are competence, confidence, and compelling. And that maybe those are the 3 C's that go under relevance. I don't know. Competence, confidence, and compelling. So you pray for a miracle to happen, or how do you equip and enable somebody to carry the moment and it feels like that's the last bastion for humans is to carry the moment because AI is going to get them there. Now you got to win the moment.
Well, I think there's a couple things to kind of back up on that. First one is that this is why I think it's 2.0 of the paradox. So if you can use precision very quickly, the good news is everybody won't use precision. So that's the good news. For the early adopters, you're going to be able to have an outsized advantage by using precision and the AI tools and everything else. But soon, as more people adopt, the buyer is going to, oh my gosh, they're going to realize that you're a seller again. and if you have the moments like I just described, you actually create not a positive, but you actually create a cost, not a benefit for the interaction, right? I got tricked into spending time with you. And if that loads up enough times, then I'm going to get that signal from all that precision and go, oh my gosh, here comes another one. So right now, that's an advantage. It's only a matter of time before the behavioral shift happens on the buyer side where they get disappointed. So this is where we owe it to the buyer to say, hey, I can be precise, but I better make sure that I've done my work, right? I'm not calling into places that really are not my ICP. I'm really thinning this down. I'm really focused. And then you come up to this other issue, which is now how do we impact the person who is going to carry that moment? once again, or rather than get to that solution, let's be on the problem for a moment, Tim. For the last decade and a half, we haven't had to do any of this. We've had a zero interest environment where we were able to just do good enough and make great money. But you know, and I know, because we've been talking to sales leaders for about the last 2 years, that it ain't so anymore, Tim, right? It's brutal out there. We got elongated cycles. We've got less efficacy in outbound. In fact, lots of people are abandoning outbound in substantial amounts. They're reducing their headcount in that space. And so we've got a generation of sellers who think they know how to sell in a moment that they're not in, which is what we talked at Emblaze about last year, right? Are you ready for the moment you're in? So the first thing I would look at is say, how do we make our talent augmentable? Because automation will take care of the things the human won't do. Whatever's left is what a human does, but the AI augments their capacity or not. And either I'm augmentable, which is coachable, curious. These are the questions. I think these are the currencies that we need to kind of double down on and say, I don't need you to have experience, although experience would be great if it adds to your business acumen, right? But I think the big question is, how do we get people augmentable? Because if we can, Tim, when we do, we experience exponential performance. And we're seeing that from some of our graduates now when we did the treatment that we did.
Well, that was interesting. So Howard has this concept called being augmentable, and he's going to share a little bit about what that means. Tim asked him, what does being augmentable mean? And what are the specific skills that someone needs to possess to be augmentable? Let's hear what he has to say.
So I think this comes down to the first thing is you need to be genuinely curious, right? I love the Ted Lasso little moment on, people aren't curious. And if you haven't looked at that clip, go look at it. It's fun. But this idea that we need to be genuinely curious. And the question then becomes, can we develop that? And we've been working on that at UTD for the last 2 years with a project with Dave Brock. But then the next piece of the puzzle that we really found out early was that a lot of our students lacked what I would call business acumen and or business knowledge. And so if I don't really understand how a business, and I'm assuming we're in the B2B space, not the B2C space. Mm-hmm. So if I don't understand how the business that I'm calling into actually makes money, which you would think, Tim, you're old enough. I'm not calling you old, but you're old enough, and I'm old enough that I think we know.
I'm augmented. I'm not old.
I'm not sure you're augmentable, actually, but that's okay.
Can't augment an old dog, yeah.
Yeah. But I think this fundamental challenge, once again, telling an anecdotal story here, is it doesn't matter if you teach methodologies. It doesn't matter if you teach skills around relevancy. If I'm not genuinely curious and I don't have an understanding of business operations and acumen, then I reach that moment and I want to carry the water. I want to deploy my training, but I really don't know what the buyer's saying. And so just kind of telling what the motivation was, I was helping my students doing customer journey mapping a couple of years ago. And it was a CEO, which wasn't fair for me. I said, do the buying journey of a CEO coming to judge one of our competitions. That was an unfair thing for me to tell them. But, I was trying to get them to think. And when they told me their stories, I went, oh, they really don't know what a CEO does. So I called a couple of my friends that were CEOs, and one of them picked up. It was Dave Brock. And Dave Brock starts talking about like what a CEO talks about. And I'm watching my students and they all glaze over because he's using language they've never heard. And I thought, oh, this is really embarrassing. So I cut Dave off. I said, hey, thanks a lot. We'll talk later. And he's like, yeah, but I got more. I said, Dave, I'll call you later. And then I asked my students, and I now ask this same question every time I get to the lecture that I do on the life of a firm, is how many of you know what a publicly traded firm versus a private firm is? Raise your hand. There's 40 kids in the classroom. On average, 10% can raise their hand. I said, how many of you know what a 10K is? On average, only 10% of the kids raise their hand. I say, how many of you know what an annual report is? How many of you know what an IPO is? And so when we have 10%, so this made me embarrassed, right? I was like, oh, we've got to fix this as an institution. And Dave, after about 6 months, he called me up just really frantic and said, we got to talk. And he said, it's the same out in the field, Howard. He said, I've been going all over the world and I ask people the same questions. He said, it's not your students, it's endemic. Salespeople don't know how people the firms generate revenue. And so we looked at that and said, how do we fix this? Because to your question, it really isn't what are the examples. It's the fact that if I don't even know what's happening, I can't be relevant, because you can't fake relevance. Because when somebody gives you a complex answer to a great question and you sit there over on the other side and go, yeah, whew, right? It's like, let me go to my next question. Or as Tim, as you were talking about before we got on, it's that fake active listening, right? It's that, oh, so you mean this? Oh, can you give us a little deeper on that? And the buyer's sitting over there going, you don't have a clue, do you?
Yeah, the ability or inability to add some value after you've just heard something, as opposed to just play back. Let me make sure I got this right. Or you're not alone in this. Like those two forms of active listening, which we've all been taught to do, is we've done the research. It doesn't even register anymore. I think people see it as phony baloney, or really it's like, oh, there's nothing else beyond that. The active listening a modern buyer requires looks more like he or she tells you something, and then you can take that and elaborate on it, or you can take that and add a little bit of insight to get their reaction. There's a quid pro quo required, I think, to stay relevant. And just playing 20 questions and affirming and confirming those answers is not relevance. That's I always say that's not a trusted advisor. That's just a tape recorder. So relevance is it requires some heavy lifting. And to your point, I just think that's going to be the line of demarcation between those who will sell and continue to bring value in the future and those who don't.
What we've done is we've said, how do we build? Can we build? It's a question, right? It's a research question. Can you build business acumen and curiosity? We have young minds, so we don't have the Tims that we have to teach the relatively mature dog a new trick. But we're using what we have, and we said, if we teach them how to prospect, but instead of selling anything, we actually have them do a deep discovery call with an executive. There is no product, just deep discovery call. And Dave Brock gave us a questionnaire with 19 questions. And, some of them are forward. Give us your biggest issues in the last 3 months. Give us your current issues. Give us your future thoughts and concerns. And this would be at your personal, your company, and your industry level. Some other things around leadership, things around time management, just asking just generic questions about what do you worry about? What do you think about? And so our question was, if we did that and we assigned the students to do 8 to 10 interviews over the semester. And so to your point, when we did that let's call it a treatment. So we did that treatment to a set of students for the last 2 years. I'm going to say the first one was just, it's a beta. And we're going to go back and analyze that set and see if we can get the same results of the ones we just got. But these kids are going out into the wild now. And this is anecdotal. It's not across the board, but an average student in both of the classes, so meaning that they didn't necessarily hit quota while in the class, but they got the treatment, right? So then they're out in the field, and just this in April, this particular alumni posted, "I feel like I'm just in a rhythm." And she said, my quota attainment was 1,000% in January, 2,000% in February, and 345 in March. And I sent her a message on LinkedIn and said, "That's the wrong direction. Congratulations, but that's it. Get that 345 at the beginning." But then I sent a message over to her boss, the VP over there, and I said, "Hey, how's the other kid from UTD doing?" And he said, "Right behind her." And I said, "How's the rest of the team doing?" And he said, "Not even close. Not even close." Now, if we went back, we've gotten some results since Emblaze, and we've now done some analysis in some of the groups. And what we're finding is by the second to the third interview, we start to see an uptick in both the curiosity and the business acumen measurements. By the seventh, 8th interview, we see extreme evidence of curiosity and business acumen. The reason why this is interesting is we give them the same 19 questions, but they're developing business acumen. They're developing this capacity to be relevant because they're curious and they understand what business leaders think about and worry about instead of just the regular active listening.
Yeah, I mean, practice. I just like they're repeatedly practicing the concept, the skill of curiosity, and then learning from the answers so that their next question's better and their next follow-up's better, and that gets people enthused. Like, oh, this is registering, and I can add some value to this. And I just think putting people in a position where they have to get that many at bats and see then the progressive improvement like that is just a missing component of so you can do that in the classroom. You can make them do it. Out in the wild, managers don't always make their people do that. So I wish we had more time today to dig into that. So we're going to have to schedule more time with you, Howard, because I think now we're getting to the crux of like, what does development look like in the field? Because UTD pumps out great graduates, but only so many.
Thank you, Dr. Howard Dover, for being on the show. And thank you for watching or listening on your favorite platform. Find the Emblazers show on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. See you soon.